Have you ever used a word so many times that it didn't even sound real anymore? Heard it so often that the original meaning of the word seemed to disappear, and now it has morphed into a meaningless sound? This process is called semantic satiation. The term was first coined in Leon Jacobowitz James's 1962 doctoral dissertation at McGill University. According to James, this occurred because the repeated neural activation of the word's representation in the brain leads to a sort of fatigue, resulting in reduction of the emotional or conceptual response to the world. This is the same feeling I get when I hear someone using the word woke unironically. But how has it come this far? Where does the word woke come from, and what meaning does it have? That is what I'm going to take a look at in this video essay. This video essay aims to unpack the ways in which liberalism has diluted and commodified the term woke, a critique that is less frequently examined compared to conservative opposition. Historical origins of woke. The word woke originates from African American vernacular English, where it began as a simple past tense of wake or awake. However, even in its earliest usage, woke carried a metaphorical meaning beyond physical wakefulness, signifying a state of alertness and awareness particularly to social and political realities. Origin and early definition 1930s. The first documented use of woke in its metaphorical sense appeared in the 1938 song Scottsboro Boys by blues musician Huddie Ledbetter, also known as Lead Belly. In the song, Lead Belly uses the phrase stay woke to advise vigilance against racial injustice, referencing the infamous case of the Scottsboro Boys, 9 black teenager falsely accused of raping 2 white women in Alabama. Later, during the civil rights movement, the term stay woke became a call to remain vigilant and informed about the systemic oppression and racial inequities. It was an exhortation to recognize the pervasive influence of racism and to resist complacency. After the civil rights movement ended, the term re-emerged in popular culture through music again. The best example of this was Erykah Badu's Master Teacher, which was released in 2008. She used the term woke as a marker of consciousness and activism, particularly in black communities. During the Black Lives Matter movement, the term entered the mainstream. The word was used to symbolize solidarity and awareness of social justice issues, including police brutality, systemic racism, and inequality. It became a shorthand for being informed, empathetic, and engaged in progressive causes. Initially rooted in African American vernacular English as a call to vigilance against injustice, woke evolved through pivotal cultural and political movements, from Scottsboro Boys to Black Lives Matter, symbolizing solidarity and awareness of systemic oppression. However, as woke gained traction in mainstream discourse, its meaning began to shift. Once a term of empowerment within marginalized communities, it became a buzzword subject to political contention. This transformation reflects the broader societal dynamics of co opting progressive movements, turning a rallying cry for justice into a polarizing symbol. The politicization of woke. Conservative co-optation of woke. While much of the mainstream discourse already critiques conservative opposition to wokeism, this essay seeks to explore the often overlooked contradictions and superficiality within liberal co-optation of the term. Before starting this chapter, I want to make clear that I am aware that the term woke has been political since its very inception. Even though many might say otherwise, the liberation of black communities in the United States is and was inherently political. The struggle black communities have gone through and continue to go through is and always has been a political one. Even when revisionists like to paint prominent black figures fighting for the liberation of black communities as these whitewashed, very cooperative figures, the reality is that many of these figures were either killed or silenced by the institutions in power. In their time, figures like Dr. Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, and Malcolm X were heavily scrutinized and sometimes even killed by the authorities. Shortly after the Black Lives Matter movement took off, the term woke was co opted and politicized. This was mainly done by critics of the Black Lives Matter movement, those on the political right. The word woke began being used by these critics as a way to mock perceived excesses of progressive ideology. It was framed as a symbol of performative activism or overzealous political correctness. This shift has since diluted the original meaning and turned it into a polarizing buzzword. Since then, the word woke has taken on a significantly broader definition. Where it once mainly referred to the acknowledgement of systemic racism and the dangers of institutionalized racism posed to people of color, it now was used against anything that seemed remotely progressive. Instead of being a term that was used to empower and protect black communities, it has now become a term to demonize anyone who doesn't blindly follow the status quo. In today's society, the term woke is a pretty solid way to illustrate the political divide that exists within the existing political discourse in the United States, and in extent, the rest of the Western world, where conservatives seem to have weaponized the term woke almost as a slur to attack anyone who is even mildly progressive. Progressives themselves have transformed the word woke into a badge of honor. In our current media landscape, the term woke is being used not only to antagonize a political group, it has also become a term used to describe certain forms of media. I'm sure most people are aware of what media is considered woke and what isn't. A great example of this is the Woke Games list. This is a list compiled by the woke content detector Steam Group. This list brands games like GTA 5 as slightly woke for the existence of multiple minor LGBTQ NPCs. The game Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection is branded as woke because the self-inflicted message in the game changed from player killed himself into player killed themselves. Other great examples is a show like The Boys. Many critics have criticized the series for turning woke in later seasons, even though, according to the creators, has always been a satirical right-wing critique. It really tells you more about the media literacy that a lot of these critics have. Conservative critiques of wokeism, often rooted in perceived overreach or ideological excess, are widely represented in contemporary debates. However, this essay focuses on how the term has been co opted and commodified by those claiming to champion it. But there is, of course, some truth to the message that more and more media has become woke. It's even a long running joke on how corporations will resort to pro LGBTQ messaging during Pride Month, but when Pride Month is over, they will revert back to their normal corporate messaging. And that brings us to the other more subtle way the term woke is being co opted. The reality is that most media isn't woke because they want to indoctrinate us with woke messaging, but rather these companies see being woke as being the more profitable option. A lot of media companies realized that by not being inclusive in their messaging or language, you are alienating a massive group of potential customers. By portraying themselves as woke, these companies hope to increase their profits. It's just a natural result of these companies trying to maximize their profits within the neoliberal capitalist system they find themselves in. But make no mistake about it, many companies that portray themselves as woke are in reality the polar opposite. The same injustices that prevail themselves in our society are also found in these entities. Corporate strategies during Pride Month. Pride Month serves as a revealing case study of how corporations engage in performative activism. Many companies adopt visible symbols of support, such as changing their logos to rainbow versions or launching Pride themed merchandise. While these gestures increase visibility for LGBTQ communities, they are often superficial and limited to the duration of Pride Month. The motivations behind these actions are largely profit driven. By aligning themselves with LGBTQ causes, corporations tap into a lucrative market of LGBTQ individuals and allies. However, their support often ends once the financial incentives diminish, with companies reverting to their standard branding and practices. Moreover, many of these same corporations remain silent or even complicit when LGBTQ rights are under threat in less progressive regions. For example, while companies celebrate Pride in Western markets, They frequently avoid such actions in countries with anti-LGBTQ laws to protect their market access. This performative approach illustrates the broader commodification of social movements. Rather than advancing genuine systemic change, corporate allyship often reduces activism to consumerism, encouraging individuals to support LGBTQ rights by purchasing pride merchandise rather than advocating for policies that materially improve the lives of LGBTQ individuals. Broader societal trends reflected. Corporate strategies during Pride Month are not isolated. They reflect broader societal dynamics in the way activism and identity politics are treated. At the heart of this phenomenon lies the commodification of activism. Pride themed products and rainbow logos turn advocacy into a marketing strategy, reducing meaningful support for LGBTQ communities to consumer choices. This mirrors a societal shift where activism is often framed as an individual responsibility rather than a collective effort for systemic change. Additionally, corporations, like much of society, engage in selective advocacy. LGBTQ rights may be championed in progressive regions, but these same companies often remain silent or even complicit in regions with regressive policies, illustrating the prioritization of marketability over principle. This selective approach reflects a broader societal discomfort with challenging deeply entrenched power structures. Furthermore, this focus on performative gestures highlight a culture shaped by neoliberal individualism. Activism has been reduced to the act of purchasing a pride t-shirt or endorsing a hashtag, diverting attention from substantive actions like policy advocacy or systemic reform. While these symbolic acts can increase the visibility for marginalized groups, they also reinforce a superficial understanding of progress. Ultimately, these corporate behaviors reflect a society still grappling with inclusivity. While increasing visibility for LGBTQ communities is a positive step, it coexists with persistent inequalities and exploitation, revealing the complex interplay between progress and commodification. The commodification of activism and the selective advocacy by corporations have far reaching consequences for marginalized groups and society as a whole. One of the most significant implications is the erosion of genuine activism. When movements are reduced to marketing strategies or symbolic gestures, they lose their grassroots power to demand systemic change. For instance, the focus on buying pride themed products as show support can divert attention from pressing issues like policy reform or protecting LGBTQ rights in hostile regions. However, performative actions are not without their benefits. The normalization of inclusivity, even when shallow, can help shift public perceptions. Pride Month campaigns, for example, have contributed to making LGBTQ representation more mainstream, which can reduce societal stigma over time. Yet, this normalization often comes at the expense of the very communities being represented. Marginalized identities are frequently exploited as marketing tools, with corporations profiting of their visibility while failing to address their needs meaningfully. Ultimately, these trends reveal a society that embraces the appearance of progress while leaving systemic inequalities largely untouched. As corporations and other institutions adopt the language of inclusion, they often fail to challenge the deeper structure of power and oppression that perpetuate discrimination. This underscores the need for grassroots activism and collective organizing to achieve a real change, as the commodification of wokeism offers little more than the illusion of progress. Ultimately, these trends reveal a society that embraces the appearance of progress while leaving systemic inequalities largely untouched. Just as corporations commodify wokeism for profit, political actors, particularly liberals, have similarly used the term for performative purposes. And this brings us to another group that have politicized the word woke: liberals. Wokeism and liberalism. For many on the right, the word wokeism and liberalism have become synonymous. Any policy supported by liberals is deemed as woke by conservatives. And even liberals themselves consider themselves woke, although they won't call themselves woke as obsessively as conservatives do. But in reality, the wokeness of liberals is as real as the wokeness of big corporations. Liberals often adopt a facade of wokeness to maintain political desirability. But people who are hardline Democrats are in reality not very woke at all. This is something which has been quite clear for the attentive eye, but it has become painfully clear for anyone looking critically during and after the 2024 presidential elections. The presidential campaign already showed major cracks in the facade of wokeness of the Democratic Party. I will go over some examples of the anti woke tendencies that were rampant during the presidential campaign. When you look at the rhetoric that the Democratic presidential campaign used about immigration and compare it to the rhetoric that was used in 2020, the difference is obvious. In 2020, the Democrats had attacked conservatives for their inhumane treatment of children in cages on the US border, and rightfully so. But immediately after the election was won by Joe Biden, the narrative started to shift. Instead of cruel treatment of Latin American immigrants, now they were seen as temporary housing facilities of illegal immigrants. Another great example is climate change. Where some conservatives flat out deny the bleak reality of climate change, liberals acknowledge it as being a real threat. However, the reality is that even though the Democratic Party might acknowledge climate change as a real threat, they don't want to materially change any policy to combat it. The Democratic Party was adamantly pro fracking during the 2024 presidential campaign. The next example I'll give is trans rights. Whereas liberals love to portray themselves as inclusive and accepting of everyone in the LGBTQ community, the truth is different. When Kamala Harris was asked what her policy would be on trans rights, she answered that she would follow the law. In reality, this would mean that states individually could decide if they would support HRT, meaning that in certain states, trans people wouldn't be protected at all under the so called woke liberal president. Finally, I'll address the elephant in the room and the only policy on which the Democratic Party wanted to take a stance during the 2024 election: abortion. Whilst I can understand and sympathize completely with all women whose basic rights will be taken away from them if they live in the wrong state, however, even here the Democratic Party is problematic. The overturning of Roe v. Wade is something that would have been completely preventable. In the decades before Roe v. Wade was overturned, there have been many times where the Democratic Party has had a majority and even a supermajority under Obama. They have had ample time to codify the right to abortion into law. Instead, the Democratic Party relied on jurisprudence. This makes it feel like the right to abortion is just used as a carrot on a stick to entice progressives to vote for the Democratic Party, even though the party has become more and more conservative itself over the years. This is, of course, mainly because of the ratchet effect. Even though the Democratic Party has been the most conservative it has been in decades leading up to the election, what came after the election was really telling. Whereas before the election, the facade started showing cracks. After the election, the facade disappeared completely after the Democratic Party lost the election in emphatic fashion. As a result of very hard-line anti-immigrant rhetoric of the Democratic Party, many males in the Hispanic demographic voted for the Republican Party. This is, of course, something which is understandable, even though the Republican Party will be similar, if not worse, than the Democrats. But these statistics caused a lot of liberals to completely drop their woke facade. They became openly xenophobic against Hispanic males. Another great example is how the liberals completely ignored the plight of the pro Palestinians. This caused a lot of Arab Americans to be alienated from the Democratic Party. This became painfully obvious in Dearborn, Michigan, where there is a large Arab American population. Ever since the Iraq War, the majority of Muslims voted for the Democratic Party. But during the 2024 election, many of the Arabs abandoned the Democratic Party because of their overtly pro Israel stance. When this became apparent after the results of the election came out, the facade once again disappeared completely. Many liberals, especially on social media, seemed almost gleeful that now Gaza would be wiped off the map completely. It illustrates very clearly that the wokeness liberals pretend to stand for is only something they uphold because they think to gain from it politically. This facade of inclusivity extends itself to even the liberation of black communities in the United States. Liberals might add hashtag BLM in their bio on their social media pages, but oppose any systemic change that materially improve the living conditions of black communities. In order to illustrate this, I will take a quote of Malcolm X, someone who is infinitely more educated on the liberation of black communities than I could ever hope to be.
Many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox, and a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to, but the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling and you take him for a friend.
What to do? All of this seems very bleak, especially if you are part of a marginalized group that will be affected by the real material change that will happen after the 2024 election. If it seems that in times of extreme uncertainty and hardship you can't even trust the people that say that they are your ally, then what can you do? The solution to this is not to distance yourself from anyone who isn't part of a marginalized group. This would only lead to further fragmentation of working people. There are still people who not just portray themselves as woke for political gain. The reality, however, is that these people are often not the people in positions of power. The best thing is to organize in your community, and this organizing must not be done fragmented, but rather united. The reality is that the goals of any person part of a marginalized community is largely the same as someone who isn't part of a marginalized community. Everyone just wants to have a decent life without having to worry about if they can afford to put food on their table. Everyone wants to have a good life for their children, a safe neighborhood where they can walk safely the streets at night, and a place where one can express themselves as they want to. If you really want to achieve a woke society where everyone is accepted for who they are, do not expect it to be given to you by the people in power. Civil rights were not won by nicely asking the ones in power or by voting harder. It was won by people organizing together to demand the basic human rights by standing up together to the people in power. The only reason you have any rights today is because of the struggles of people in the past. Without their blood, sweat, and tears, it would have been impossible for you to be emancipated to the extent you are today. You are standing on the shoulders of giants. You owe it to them to further the struggle for a total liberation and emancipation. Because liberation and emancipation are not simple things that will come to you easily. You will have to fight for it, for you and for the generations that will come after you. Conclusion. As discussed at the beginning of this essay, the overuse and distortion of the term woke have rendered it almost unrecognizable. Much like the phenomenon of semantic statization, this journey through its historical origins, co-optation, and current misuse demonstrates how woke has shifted from a symbol of empowerment to a tool for division and commodification. To reclaim its original purpose, we must resist its shallow appropriation and unite in collective action. True liberation, as history shows, is achieved not by those who wield power, but by the tireless efforts of the one who demand justice and equality.